I often get asked, what's your favorite movie? A question where you can only pick one out of the myriad of films is too hard for me. So I always have my top 3 favorite films that I keep in my back pocket. In no particular order, I always tell people my top 3 favorite films are 500 Days of Summer, A Clockwork Orange, and Gran Torino. Something about Gran Torino always keeps me coming back for more. The character development, suspense, and Clint Eastwood as a terrifying old man all draw me in and create a compelling story focusing on unmasking masculinity, the progression of ideals, and ultimately connecting with the other. Although this movie is filled with a lot of racism, and I mean a lot,
damn barbarians.
When you're able to get past the tough exterior, Gran Torino is a gem of a film. When dissecting Gran Torino, it's important to take into consideration that Clint Eastwood is the director and star of this film. Clint Eastwood became a household name after starring in Western films such as The Good, The Bad, and The Ugly, Unforgiven, and High Plains Drifter. When we look at Clint Eastwood's history with Western films, I think we can develop a new lens to look through in regards to Gran Torino. When looked at through the context of Clint Eastwood's career with films, we can see Gran Torino as a post-Western and a critique of the Western genre as a whole. Before we can get into what a post-Western is, we need to take a step back and see what makes a Western film. When we think of the Western genre, we may imagine John Wayne or strife between cowboys and Native Americans. While these two images might make up most of what we think of when we think of Western films in general, there are a couple of key characteristics that make up the Western genre. First is the setting. Westerns tend to take place in untamed land. The idea of unexplored territory that settlers can build small towns in is a key concept for Western films. This is the chaos and disorderliness of the unknown. The setting for Westerns consistently involves delving into the unknown and attempting to bring some order to all of the chaos of this uncharted territory. This brings us to our second characteristic, the strong lawman who is able to defeat the quote-unquote bad guys and bring order to the town. The strong lawman character is typically the hero of the story and is usually associated with cowboys, sheriffs, or gunmen. An important aspect of the strong lawman archetype is his masculinity. The lawman is a strong hero who can take action and brings about order in a setting filled with disorder. Gran Torino certainly lacks cowboys in small towns surrounded by dust. However, we still see many of the same ideas of the Western introduced in Gran Torino. Gran Torino takes place in Detroit and centers around Walt and his neighbors. Walt has been in his house for many years and seems to be one of the last residents who isn't of a minority group. Walt represents the idealistic expansionist settlers of the Western genre, as he is part of a generation that's American first. This is demonstrated by his disdain for minorities and his son who doesn't drive an American truck. He is the symbol of those settlers that came to the West to look for a better life. However, Walt is still here after all the dust is settled. He has to contend with the minority groups who have moved in and the consequences of others who have come to America looking for a better life. He's a specter from the past and isn't ready to accept what happens after the Wild West stops being so wild. Although our story is far removed from any deserts, we still have the same disorder and chaos that is reminiscent of Westerns. Throughout the film, we see multiple acts of crime, though we never see police. The scenery that we get is one of lawlessness, similar to Westerns prior to the arrival of the hero. Walt obviously represents the lawman who brings order to the town, as he's one of the only people who can successfully stop the Hmong gangs from doing what they want. Walt also demonstrates the ideal of masculinity to his neighbor Tao, though he does this reluctantly. Where we start to see a critique of the Western genre is with the development of Walt throughout the film. When we first meet Walt, he's a cynical, angry old man. He's been through war, his wife just died, and his family's a disappointment. Like I said earlier, Walt in the beginning of the film is representative of the Western genre ideal. He's American first, and the law of the land is strength. We see this attitude towards strength from Walt as he routinely threatens others with violence. First with the Hmong gang members who are on his lawn, and later when he's saving Tao's cousin from being assaulted. Both of these instances are conflicts that are resolved through the threat of violence. Let's look at another Western film that has the same ideology. In High Plains Drifter, Clint Eastwood stars as the mysterious stranger who rides into town looking for a shave and a bath. This mysterious stranger is a gunman and is the strongest man around. The stranger takes what he wants with little regard to how it affects those around him. He forces himself on women, doesn't hesitate to shoot men that taunt him, and orders those around to give him what he wants. While this movie is surely not how many westerns depict their protagonist, High Plains Drifter does something interesting. This western is a meta-western which shifts the narrative and lens through which we can view the American Wild West. Instead of creating a narrative of a good, wholesome lawman driving out the evil outlaws or Native Americans, we get the stranger who's amoral. The Wild West was a period of time in which strength determined who was good. Essentially, the stranger is what German philosopher Nietzsche would call an Übermensch. He is the superior man who takes what he wants through strength and doesn't abide by convention for the sake of convention. In Nietzsche's work on the genealogy of morals, Nietzsche examines the roots of language and how the words good and evil have shifted throughout time. Nietzsche posits that originally the word good was synonymous with power. Rather than good and evil, there was good and weak. Those deemed good were strong and competent. They were the aristocrats who were able to take what they wanted because they had strength. The reversal of values took place because the weak were simply just too weak to take what they wanted. With this inversion of morality, those who suffered and were meek were now noble and good, while brutality in taking was determined as an evil. The Christian imperative of turning the other cheek and loving thy neighbor as thyself was seen as the highest good, when in reality it was a clever trick by those who were weak in order to place themselves above the strength of the aristocrats and warriors. The movie High Plains Drifter returns to the previous conception of good as strength, and the stranger isn't afraid to take what he wants with his strength. Gran Torino depicts Walt in an ironic sense as the strong lawman. Walt is our protagonist who is more of an anti-hero at the beginning of the film. He's racist, he can't connect to anyone around him,
That wag hates my ass.
and he only saves others due to ostensibly selfish reasons. In this sense, Walt's character is similar to our protagonist in the film High Plains Drifter, and he's the Nietzschean overman. He dispenses with contemporary morality in favor of morality that favors strength. However, these ideas only hold for Walt in the beginning of the film. As Walt progresses in the film and his relationship with Tao and his neighbors develops, we start to see that Walt's previous morality has been inverted. Walt goes out of his way to teach Tao what masculinity really is, and he protects his neighbors as if they were his own. Rather than abiding by the Nietzschean principle of goodness equaling strength, Walt starts to understand that the Christian ideals that he shrugged off earlier in the film may be a better way to function. This is realized in the maxim, love thy neighbor as thyself. Walt does start to literally love his neighbor as himself as he spends more and more time with Tao than anybody else.
Well, you are a pussy, you know. You want to hang out with guys like that. What was your initiation supposed to be?
The culmination of this ideal is represented in the penultimate scene of the movie. Walt has gone through a character arc that brings him from a racist, self-centered, and Nietzschean anti-hero to a racist, compassionate, and ultimately sacrificial hero. The Nietzschean ideal is replaced with the Christian ideal as Walt becomes the sacrificial lamb. We see two occasions of Walt dealing with controversy early in the film, and both involve him displaying strength through his own means via a gun. He's the gunslinger from the Western genre long since gone. However, when he decides that enough is enough with the Hmong gang, instead of shooting and killing each gang member, he sacrifices his life to ensure that the gang members spend the rest of their lives in prison. This scene demonstrates the post-Western message of Gran Torino in an incredibly effective way. Walt shows up to the gang members' house as all the neighbors are watching and waiting. The gang members and Walt have a stare down. Just as the Western films of the past have the gunman and outlaw meet for a showdown at high noon, Walt has met up with the gang members. However, at the count of 3, Walt doesn't draw his gun. Instead, he grabs a lighter and in this moment demonstrates that compassion and sacrifice are ideals surpassing the ideals of strength from both Nietzsche and the Westerners of the past.